I'm delighted to welcome today Richard Foster from Brainstorm Security. Welcome, Richard.
Hello.
So we've got a lag on the call, so hopefully things are going to be all right on here, but we'll see how we go. So where are you based, Richard?
I'm based in Hampshire in the UK.
Okay, and I'm in the Algarve, Portugal. So thank you to the technology for bringing us together. Wonderful. So Brainstorm Security. There's a reason behind why you chose that for your company name, and I think viewers will be surprised and astounded by what you have to say. So you're an ex-police officer
That's
of
correct.
nearly 30 years,
Yes.
and you're now running your security company that looks at all aspects of security, and obviously these days especially cybersecurity as well as physical aspects.
Yeah, both physical and cybersecurity. Yeah, that's correct.
So talk us through what led you to starting your own company from being a police officer, because you didn't actually do the normal retirement route, did you? Tell listeners what happened to you.
No, I'd always wanted to be a police officer. I grew up sort of in the 80s, and as a result of that, I don't know if you remember watching TV in the 80s. There was a particular TV series called Miami Vice,
Yes.
and I was obsessed with it. And I thought, right, that's the job for me. That's what I fancied doing, dashing around in a speedboat, high speed chases and Ferraris. So I wanted to join the police. I was a little disappointed, I must say, when I first joined to realize it wasn't going to be like that. But I had an amazing career. Um, so I spent probably the first 10 years or so, frontline, walking the streets, driving police cars, attending 999 calls, that kind of thing. Uh, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was really good. It gave you the ability to speak to people. It made you very adaptable, and you also had to be able to deal with anything that was thrown at you, because you would turn up to an incident and you had to be very creative and think on your feet and just deal with it. But there's also a little element of you like to take control as a result of that.
Mm.
So I had a bit of a mindset that when you turned up to an incident, you were the person who were going to save the day and take control. And I later learned in life, you can't always be in control, but I'll kind of go into that a little bit later. So I spent about 10 years doing all sorts of sort of public facing roles. And then for the last sort of 18 years, I was working sort of within CID, plainclothes work, doing serious organised crime. So as a result of that serious organised crime, we investigated all sorts of things. So from drug supply to murders to kidnaps to child abuse, it was any really serious offences that are out there we were looking at. And within that role, I was very, very fortunate because we were in a small team of people, and very often the bosses would come to us and sort of say, right, we would like you to help solve this particular crime. We know there is this particular person committing whatever the crime was. And they'd say, can you come up with an imaginative way to try and gather the evidence and deal with them? So that's what we did. So we would often, part of the name comes from brainstorming. So we would all sit around in a circle and we'd brainstorm and try and come up with very imaginative ideas. Some of them were just way out there and would be completely outlandish, but some of them were really good. And I would probably say about 95% of the time we would manage to capture whoever it was and get a really good result. So we had some really big successes, and in particular with sort of the child abuse side of things, which is what took me into sort of cyber security and learning how criminals work online, the methods that they might use to target either victims or individuals. And then that sort of spider-legged out to all sorts of criminality, from hackers stealing people's data, attacking companies, people overtaking email systems. It might be they're trying to purchase drugs online and then resupply them. And it also made the world a global trade center, the internet did. And as a result of that, crime became global because of the internet. So it was a very exciting time. And we were right at the start of when the internet came about. I remember distinctly when I first joined the police, we had these little terminals on the desks, which just had green writing on them. And there was no flashy interface. It was just green text. And there was like one computer in an office, and it was on a desk, and you didn't take it anywhere. And that was it. And as time went on and developed, then we had new systems in place. And that crime fighting ability by using computers definitely exploded, really. So yeah, that was kind of sort of the internet-y bit with what I was doing. So I'll go on to kind of how I ended up having to then set up my own company as a result of leaving the police. So to be fair, I was quite happy in the police. I had I was about 27 years, 28 years at that point in service. I planned to do 30-year career, but it was cut kind of short. So I went into work one day 2 years ago and drove in, and as I'm driving along, there is some manure on the side of the road, a bag of manure. And I remember seeing it thinking, oh, I need some of that for the garden. And there was a sign saying free manure. And I thought, shall I put it in the boot of my car now? And I thought, no, I'll have my meeting first and then I'll come back. And I'm very glad I did that, because my car would have stunk if I'd have done that otherwise. So I managed to get to work, had my little sort of meeting initially. And as I'm coming away from the building, I bump into someone who I knew who I needed to have a chat with. So we had just a little one-on-one meeting, sat down, and as we're talking, I came over all funny, and I've never been particularly ill myself. And I got very hot. I was sweating. I didn't know what was up with me. And my colleague could see that there was something just wasn't quite right with me. So he said, would you like a glass of water? So I said, yes, please. So off he went, came back with a glass of water. And I reached out to get the glass and totally missed it. And I was seeing double because I thought there was 2 glasses in front of me. And I thought, goodness, what's happening? So I stood up to go to the toilet, and I'm then stumbling all over the place, falling into walls, falling against the glass door. And I thought, what's happening to me? And I had an almighty headache. And the headache started at the front of my head and then went to the back of my head, and it was just throbbing. And I can only describe it as the worst headache you can imagine. For me, it seemed very strange because I never had headaches. I never had any symptoms that anything was wrong with me. So I went and used the toilet, and I said to my colleague, I said, right, I'm going to go and sit in my car outside and turn the air conditioning on to cool down because I felt very, very hot. So that's what I did. I sat down in the car, went the seat down, turned the aircon on. My colleague left, and then I became nauseous, and I opened the door and I was vomiting on the side of the road, which to most people passing by probably looked like I was very drunk, stumbling into this car and then being sick on the floor. So about 10 minutes later, another colleague of mine came out to check on me. And my first colleague had said, can you just go and check on Richard? He's downstairs. So this person came out and said, you're obviously not very well. Come back into reception. So into reception, more vomiting, more sickness. And they're asking me questions and I'm answering them. And I think everything is totally fine. But from what they've told me afterwards, some of the answers I was coming out with was just complete gobbledygook. So in my head, everything was fine. So eventually there was a slight delay because I think at first they thought I was drunk, which was kind of understandable. But I obviously hadn't been drinking and didn't smell of drink. So someone decided to call an ambulance, and an ambulance arrived. I had some various tests, and they put us in the back of the ambulance and said, right, we're going to take you to the hospital. So off I went to the local hospital, and they'd obviously phoned in beforehand. So VIP treatment straight through the door that you see in the ER, crashed straight in. And I was into an MIR scanner, and they scanned my brain, and they came straight out, and they said, right, okay, what we're going to do now, they didn't tell me what was up. They just said, you're going to another hospital now. We're going to take you down to Southampton, which there's a special neurological centre there. So I said, okay. So back into the back of the ambulance, again on a trolley, because I couldn't walk at this stage. And I'm riding in the back of this ambulance, and the two tones are going, and they're going down the motorway. And I'm thinking, knowing from what I know from being a police officer, when you give escorts to ambulances, it's normally because the patient is critically ill, and they don't normally transfer patients between hospitals unless there's a really strong reason. And it wasn't because all the beds were full at the hospital. I was obviously very critically ill. And there's a little bit of me that made me think, I'm out of control at this stage. I'm totally out of control. There's nothing I can do about it. Sit back, enjoy the ride. So that's kind of what I did. I just sat back, enjoyed the ride, spoke to the ambulance crew as best as I could, and eventually arrived at the hospital and was taken in. I had another scan done there, and they said, yeah, we suspect you've had some sort of a stroke at first. So I said, okay. But they said they'd have to do some more tests in relation to that. So some of those tests involved an angiogram, which people who've ever had a heart attack will be familiar with. It involves threading a very thin sort of tube into your arteries and into your heart. So for me, they had to thread this tube through my groin. It went inside me, through my heart, into my skull and into my brain, and then they pump fluid, which shows up on the scanner, and they do it whilst you're in the scanner. They say, stay completely still. And they say, because if you don't stay still, you could be sort of paralyzed, you could die as a result of it. So you're very much doing as they tell you. So perfectly still. And they did this, and they came back, and the following day, the consultant came to speak to us, and he said, right, you're very ill. You've had what's called an aneurysm that's burst. So I've had a major blood hemorrhage within the brain cavity and the skull, and that had just completely bled out. They were just trying to stabilize us at this stage. And they said, it's not from a normal stroke where you might have a buildup of, say, fatty tissues within the brain. It's as a result of what's called an AVM, which is, I can never pronounce it exactly right. It's an arterial vascular malformation. The way the consultant described it to me is, if you have a fishing line and it's all knotted and tangled, that's kind of what it looks like. And it grows from pretty much childhood, from birth. Most people never know they've got one. And there's all different pressures. So you'll have an artery, you'll have a vein, you'll have a capillary, and they're all in together in a big ball, and the blood flow's going through. And eventually you get weak points, which is what the artery is, not the artery, the aneurysm. And that's like a balloon where you've blown, and you might suck on a balloon and you cause a weak point, and when that pops, that's what happens. So he said, that's what you have, and we're just going to stabilize you for a couple of weeks, see how it goes, and then we'll come up with some treatment options for you. So I said, okay, that's fine. So at this stage, I was in quite a poor way. I couldn't really speak properly. Um, I was unable to walk. I tried to roll from one trolley to another and fallen off. Um, I wasn't even able to sort of stand up to go to the toilet, nothing like that. My eyesight had massively deteriorated, so I was having real difficulty sort of even viewing a computer screen or a phone or anything. So all this had kind of occurred, and I'm just trying to work out what to do. And as far as my wife was concerned, I'd only nipped out for an hour. I was going to come back and make her lunch. She had no idea what was going on. Somebody from work had eventually gone round to her house. And as you can imagine, she was probably a little bit shocked when a police officer turns up at home, sort of saying, oh, Richard's been involved in an incident at work and she's fearing the worst, sort of thing. So it was very, very difficult on sort of friends and family at the time. So as a result of the various tests, and they managed to sort of stabilize us, and then they said, your options basically are we could use some type of radiation to try and clear some of the tangle, but it's not likely to work particularly well in your case. There are some experimental type gamma where they can shoot sort of lasers and things at it, and they said, not really. In your case, because it's burst, if you don't treat it, it will increase your chance of death by 2 every single year. So for me, it was a no-brainer. It was surgery. So they said, we can't do keyhole surgery because it's on your skull, and they would have to cut a large circle, in effect, at the back of my skull. So remove the skin, pull that back, drill 6 to 8 holes, and then cut around it, remove the skull, and then gain access to the brain and cut away little bits. And that shouldn't have been there. So I said, well, there was kind of no option for me. It was either do that or sort of risk dying at a later stage. So I said, yeah, let's go ahead with that. So they said, okay. So I had to go home then for a couple of weeks, and my wife just looked after me, which, bless her cotton sock, she did an amazing job, and she was very scared. And it was quite a scary moment because I knew that I'd have to go into surgery. They'd be cutting part of my brain away. And your brain is what makes you what you are. So would it affect feelings? Would it affect my character, my sense of humor? Would I be able to remember passwords? Would I remember how to get into my phone? All sorts of basic things. Internet banking, would I be able to remember how to do that kind of thing? So there's lots of other things that I hadn't even considered. It would affect things like driving, wasn't allowed to drive. So there was all sorts of different considerations, but there was no real choice. I just had to go with the flow and just take it on. So that's exactly what I did. So it was about 3 weeks later, I went back into hospital and had a little tear in my eyes. I walked in, said goodbye to the wife. And during the whole of this, another complication was we were in the middle of COVID. So at this stage, it was the killer disease that was taking lots of people's lives. There was no antidote for it. There was no vaccines. Everyone was having to be contained and tested. And I had to go through quite a rigorous testing procedure before even being allowed to go into the hospital. And I had to wash myself with all sorts of solutions and things. But we got through all that, got in, but it meant I had no one being able to visit me. And speaking to like my wife on the phone, there'd be times when I would wake up in, say, the middle of the night, and I'd start sending a text, and I didn't even realize it was the middle of the night. It was just because they're giving you drugs and you're very tired as a result of it. You're suffering a lot of fatigue. So I'd send a message, and she'd receive a message in the middle of the night, totally gobbledygook because I can't really see the screen on what I'm typing. And she's then fretting out of her mind. And I'm thinking, I'm just telling her I'm okay. So there was lots of little things that we kind of had to get over, but we did. So cut a very long story short, on the second time, went in, the surgeon, they did their thing. I was in surgery for about 8 hours, came out of that, and eventually woke up on a intensive care unit, high dependency unit, and I was there for a day or so. I think the first thing I did, I asked the nurse, would you be able to do a selfie shot of the actual wound? Because if I'm going to have a selfie of it, I might as well as do it whilst it's fresh. So I had that. And it was just amazing. The moment I woke up, the only way I can describe it is having a bucket with sand inside. And before, it felt like the bucket had loads of water in it, as well as the sand. And every time you twisted it, it would take another half a rotation with the sand swimming around inside. And I suppose it's because the blood was between the brain and the skull. And once the operation was done, I could move my head and it just felt like it did previously. It was incredible. But then I still had a lot of other struggles to then deal with after that, which was things like learning to walk, learning to talk. My balance is even now still affected, but in the great scheme of things, very, very minor compared to where I was. So it gave me a lot of time in my recovery as to what I was going to do next. And the police were fantastic. They kept me on sick pay, and I'd have regular visits, and they wanted me to return. But I'd always had a dream of starting my own company, and I had a lot of skills within the sort of cyber world and social engineering. And as a result of that cyber social engineering experience that I had, I thought I can put my skills to good use. So I set up this company, and the other part of the name of it, Brainstorm Security, is as a result of what happened to me. So a lot of it was moving forward and sort of just taking one step at a time. I think some of my difficulties in starting the company from sort of my own rehabilitation. So rehabilitation took maybe a year, and then I set up the company after I left the police. Normally, when you might set something like that, you might take clients with you, you would advertise, you'd tell people what was happening. But for me, everything happened just immediately. And I didn't get that opportunity to maybe network with people that I was going to do beforehand. So it's been a very sort of slow growth at the start of trying to network with people. But I'm slowly getting there now. And obviously, I've done some more cyber certifications, because I was very aware that on my CV I'd done lots of courses within the police, but they were kind of police only courses, and there might be courses that either the general public wouldn't be aware of or wouldn't know of. It would have no relevance to them. So I then thought I had to go and do some cyber certifications. So I did some studying online in my part-time whilst I was getting better. So slowly sort of building up and then sort of networking with people, trying to find clients. All very good. So that's kind of in a very brief snapshot, kind of how I got there.
Amazing, absolutely amazing. So you joined in the 80s, you were having your adventures in the 80s. My dad joined the police in 1960 and I was in the police in the 70s. So we've
Fantastic.
covered like 20 odd years, and you were looking at Miami Vice. Dad and I were looking at Dixon of Dock Green, and sit up and beg typewriters with carbon paper. I mean, when you think this is all in living memory and where we are now, it's just bonkers, isn't it?
That's right. It was like a card system for the intelligence. There we had little bits of card that you go through with people's names on it.
Yeah.
And people would laugh now if you sort of told them that's how we did it, but that's how it was done.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely, exactly.
Yeah.
So, your wife, does your wife think she's got the old Richard back? Is there a new version? How are you compared to how you were from her perspective?
my wife was very worried initially that I wouldn't be the same person. And at the time when in that in-between time when I was home before the surgery, she would often sort of say I was a little bit grumpy, which is kind of understandable, and maybe I've lost a little bit of my sense of humour. My kids also noticed that. I've got two daughters. They both kind of noticed that I was a little bit sort of grumpy, and they were amazing. They were really good and supportive. One of the really nice things that came out of it was we spoke with the nurses on the neurological ward. We said, is there a way for the children to be involved in asking questions? Because they've got lots of questions about, would I be normal again, like you were asking then? And what they did, they arranged for the children to email the nurses. And on night term, when it was a bit quieter, the nurses would then respond to the kids and the kids would have an answer in the morning. And it worked brilliant. And the kids loved it. The hospital loved it. And as a result of that going on now, all the patients who suffer these kind of strokes and things, certainly within Southampton, are offered that as a service as a result of having that conversation with them. So real positives come from that. It really good. As far as I'm concerned, I'm back to my old self, and I think my wife would agree. She's back to giving me plenty of jobs to do. The sympathy element has all gone now, so it is as I was before. I just have to remind myself occasionally that I do have some limitations. For example, I took my children to a running track the other day. They wanted to practice their running. They're both keen on athletics. And I said, did you want to give your dad a race? So we had a little run on the sprinting track, and I must have got maybe 10 yards before falling over myself. And it's because in my own head, I'm thinking, I'm fine now, but obviously I'm not. And there's times when my brain just has to remind me, no, you're not okay. And I fell over, dusting myself down. They were good as gold about it. But yeah, I think certainly from a mental well-being position, yeah, definitely back to as I was.
Brilliant, truly inspiring story, wonderful. It's not the only thing that's happened to you though. Didn't you have an incident with a kettle some years ago?
I did, yeah. That's probably about 5 years ago now. I'd taken my daughters to a outdoor school where you would learn woodcraft and do whittling, campfires, that kind of thing. And there was what's called a Kelly kettle, and they're used in the military for making cups of tea. And basically, it's a kettle with a tube with inside it. There's water, and then around the outside of it, in an outer seal, is where you put some twigs and you set fire to it, and the airflow goes up underneath and basically boils. So you're just burning local twigs that were in the area. Unfortunately, mine had a cork in it. It was a very old style one, and there was a cork in it that was pushed in. So once I lit it and was firing it up, I was lying down, blowing underneath, and I heard a pop. And the kettle basically had built up enough pressure inside and just exploded. So I was covered in scalding hot water, the whole of my chest, all down one arm. And basically it all bubbled up. And because I was in the woods, we didn't really have much of a first aid kit. There was a very limited first aid kit. Luckily, I've had first aid training, as is my wife. So we're asking for things like cling film to wrap around the wounds to prevent them getting infection, and to try and cool it by pouring water over it. But we didn't have much running water because we're in the middle of the woods and we just had a few jugs. So we made our way to hospital, and I went to accident and emergency, presenting myself to the nurse and said, I've been burnt. And she just took one look at me and said, straight in the back. I had to strip off, naked in the back, and put under a cold chair for 20 minutes. And as a result of that, I then had lots and lots of blisters on me. And basically, the treatment goes, you have to keep going back to hospital every day. They pop the blisters, peel off the skin, and then they wrap special bandages which contain silver, which acts as like a really good antibiotic, antiseptic. And you had to do this basically every day because the blisters would come back and then they popped it again. But because of the amount of surface area that I was burnt, I had to go to the specialist burns unit then in Salisbury because it can be fatal basically as a result of the actual burns themselves, the amount of it. So I was in and out of the burns hospital there, but they fantastic treatment and kind of looking at me now, you can hardly see where there is a mark on me. And I was very lucky, it didn't go near my face, and really lucky that none of the children were near me when it exploded. So yeah,
You
it was
have
all
been in
good.
the wars, Richard, haven't you? You truly have. And
Yeah.
I understand as well that somewhere along the line you caught Lyme disease.
Yes. Yes. So during my rehabilitation, um, like I said, I've got a difficulty with balance. So when I walk, certainly on like a main road, I have an occasion to just sort of step out into the road for no reason, to the annoyance of cars coming past. So when I was learning to walk, I would often go into like wooded areas or into rural land because it didn't matter if I went left and right. But as a result of that, I got a tick bite and I had no idea this tick had bitten me until my daughter one day said, "What's that mark on your leg?" And there was a classic bullseye um, bruise on my leg. And I said, "Oh, yeah, that's really unusual." So with a pencil, well, with a pen, I made a little mark on it. And sure enough, within a couple of days, it had grown and was getting bigger. All the sort of classic symptoms. So I contacted my local GP and they said, "Yes, you've got Lyme's disease." And I think you might know yourself. I think you might have had a little touch of the Lyme's disease as well from reading up. Um, it's a neurological condition that, if untreated and left, can be very, very serious. So the doctor put me on some very strong anti histamines and antibiotics, which completely cleared everything up, and I've not suffered as a result of it. So I was very lucky it was caught early.
Brilliant, brilliant. I haven't had Lyme's disease. I've had 4 different cancers and kidney disease, but I've not
Oh,
had Lyme.
crikey,
Um,
I thought Lyme's disease was in there as well.
yeah, no, it wasn't. With Lyme disease, ivermectin is very efficient as a precaution as well. So ivermectin is the thing that deals with COVID, but also it's a wormer for dogs. So the adult size dose
Yeah,
is the same as a big dog dose. So the vet can help in these
I'll
situations as well. So there you
remember
go.
that for next time.
Yeah, well, hopefully there won't be a next time.
No,
And it is a killer. Lyme disease is a killer.
yeah,
Your
absolutely.
burns potential killers and your aneurysm was the potential. So you've had 3 lives, Richard. Can you stop it, please?
Yes, yeah. I don't know if I'm a cat or not. I don't know whether I have the full 9 or not. But I've said to the wife and the kids, that's enough now. I've kind of had my share of it. And you say about it being a killer, it really is. Certainly the brain thing. I think statistically, what I had for the AVM was very rare. I think 1 in 100,000 have it. Most of those will be completely unaware. And then when it bursts, uh, out of 5 people, 3 of those people don't even make it to hospital, pronounced dead before they get there. And then there's a 1.5 who are severely disabled as a result of it, unable to walk, speak, that kind of sort of level of disability. And then you have that 0.5%, which is like myself, I've kind of come off very well. And I was very lucky that I was in a location in the world where we had some of the best brain surgeons available. So,
Amazing.
better luck.
As a result of what's happened to you, do you think that has given you a different outlook on life?
Sorry, I missed that.
Right. As a result of what's happened to you, has it given you a different outlook on life now?
Oh, without a doubt. Yeah. Yeah. Certainly, without a doubt. I've always been a very positive person, and I've always tried to surround myself with positive people, and I would recommend everyone doing the same. There's times when things are just out of your control, and there's nothing you can do about it, and you just got to go with the flow. But I've always been sort of fairly cautious in my approach to life and money and things, but now I might take maybe a slight more risk, um, because you only get one life and you only get one chance at things. And I think probably more so, my dad died sort of last year, and as a result of that, it kind of makes you just kind of take stock and think, you're I'm kind of on a bit of a countdown now to sort of old age, and I need to do the things that I want to do before I become in a way that I'm not going to be able to do them. So things like setting up the business, traveling, um, having special memories with sort of family members. Um, I found sort of friends in particular. There were certain friends who I might have called nearly acquaintances, and they kind of came out of the wardrobe in the dark when this happened, and they were amazing, absolutely amazing. And it makes you realise how many lives you've touched, and how sort of important your friendship is to them. And it's just made me readdress that and think, yeah, I need to spend more time connecting with people, having those friendships, and taking time to say, right, no, I will have a coffee. I know the ironing needs doing, I need the washing needs doing, but I'm going to go and have a coffee and meet that person and spend half an hour with them, just in get just talk about any old rubbish. It doesn't matter. It's about just generating them friendships, because we only get one shot at this, don't we? So you just got to go out there and grab it.
As far as we know, yes, yes. Where we get on to afterwards, who knows? But yeah, I found that I'm also, through my situation, I was given less than a year to live in 2015 with the stage 4 cancer, and I've become far more tolerant in some respects, but far less tolerant in other respects. I've always, the same as you, always been positive. But I'm at the point now where if anybody is like, poor me, I'm a victim sort of thing, well, they can go away. I'm not interested. I can't be doing with the, woe and woeness, poorness, victim thing. And you think, oh, for God's sake, stuff happens to all of us. Just deal with it, get on with it. I know not everybody can be as positive and everything as we are,
no.
but it does heighten, doesn't it? It heightens what we have had before, and we come out of it with even more resilience.
And with social media especially, it's very easy to read people's pages and think life is totally perfect. But once you actually connect on a one-to-one basis and physically see people and have a chat with them, you realise everyone's got issues and things going on in their lives. You can give them a bit of help by listening to them, just
Exactly.
lending them an ear.
Yeah.
And that's all it takes, sort of thing. But no one has a perfect life, and everyone is dealing with issues, and they might have real struggles going on underneath. And it's about showing a bit of compassion to those people. But like you say, if there's people just wanting a bit of drama, not interested, just move on.
Yeah.
Just,
Absolutely.
I can't be dealing with it. Life's too short.
Exactly. Well, it's been a pleasure hearing you again, Richard, and I'm sure you would have inspired several listeners with your stories. How old are the girls now, by the way?
10 and 13.
Right,
so they're at a lovely age where they're back chatting me now.
Yeah. Wonderful. So, how do people get hold of you, and particularly companies who might want to take advantage of your expertise in the cybersecurity world?
My website is brainstormsecurity.com or .co.uk, and I'm sure if you just put a search in for that, that will come up. I've got social media on Twitter, Instagram, and also LinkedIn. If you just search for Richard Foster Security, you'll find me there.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Richard. Take
Oh,
care, and
thank you.
please
I mean,
try and keep out of trouble.
I will. I promise. Scouts on it.